and we see how destructive he is. And so we're concerned about resisting temptation, and we talked about proper attitudes towards sin. We talked about improper attitudes before, and then starting 2 weeks ago, we've been talking about proper attitudes. And the first one was to expose. You remember we want to see Satan as real and dangerous. 1 Peter 5 verse 8, we want to expose in ourselves sin. We want to, through passages such as James 1, 13 through 16, 2 Timothy 2, 20 and 21, we want to expose that in ourselves. We need to expose it in the world and in brethren. And we talked about Titus 1 verse 13 says, reprove them. 1 Corinthians 5 verse 20 says, what do I have to do with judging outsiders? He was speaking there of judging insiders. He says, do you not judge those who are within the church? And so within a deeper study of that passage, God is saying, let me pass judgment on the world, but you have to take care of this. And so we see that. That's really what a lot of what was going on there in the Corinthian letter, in the first Corinthian letter, was Paul was saying, hey, you need to address these things and do this and change these things. Last week we talked about to shun and resist is a proper attitude towards sin. We need to shun and resist it. We left off in 1 Corinthians 15 verse 33, a very common passage to us all. It says, do not be deceived, bad company corrupts good morals. And this is something we've heard since we were little, right? Our parents would point a finger at us and shake it and say, hey, watch out who you're with. And so we think about those things. And very much that comes from 1 Corinthians 15 verse 33. When we're thinking about shunning or resisting those things, if we put ourselves in company that is attached to sin or doing those things, that's going to create temptation for us. And so that only makes sense that we would want to remove ourselves from that situation. Sometimes easier said than done, right? Co-workers, situations where we are pressured to be a part of something or a collection of people, and so we are ostracized, or we are shown to be very different right away when we put ourselves away from a group such as that. That can be very detrimental to things like our career, our standing within a group. If all of a sudden maybe you're even a part of a group that has a good place doing a good service, but within that group they decide to partake in something different, or that is not correct. All of a sudden you can be in a bad spot, and I think we've all been through that or experienced that. But we need to shun and resist these things. Let's turn to Ephesians chapter 6. Will be our next opening. Ephesians chapter 6. Last week we really had a lot of discussion on a few verses. I think we've got a few this morning that may cause some discussion too, but I'd like to get through some more. Ephesians 6, and starting in verse 10, Ephesians 6:10. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the full armor of God so that you will be able to stand firm against the schemes of the devil. For our struggle is not against powers, is not against rulers, against the powers, against the world forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in heavenly places. Therefore, take up the full armor of God so that you will be able to resist in the evil day, and having done everything, to stand firm. And it goes on and continues, and then we have that breakdown of those various armaments. The helmet of salvation, we're going to gird ourselves, we're going to shod our feet, we're going to pick up the Spirit, the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. And so we understand that. But we're told here to prepare ourselves, or to clothe ourselves with these elements. What's almost reminiscent is Matthew 22, right? The parable of the wedding feast, where the king is providing a feast for his son in the marriage, and he invites and he's declined, and then to go out on the highways and the byways and bring everybody in. And then when the king gets there to the wedding feast, he's walking through the crowd and he finds one, And he says, friend, why do you not have on the proper wedding attire or the wedding gown? And then that one is thrown into outer darkness. You know, so you can almost think of the theme of us being clothed properly before God. You know, that situation, the parable of the wedding feast, I think we tend to look at that as maybe, you know, eternity's gate, being there at judgment, or, you know, the great feast that would be the start of heaven, perhaps, something to think about. But, you know, that's not the only place that we have to be clothed properly, right? And I think there's great reference there to us having Christ on in baptism. Remember, the king at that time, what was actual practice was to come to his wedding feast, was be adorned with the garments that he would provide. And so it was not even up to this man to go find the garment or to spend the money or to do, but it was to simply put on the king's clothing. And so it is with us, with Christ's baptism. God has provided that. We simply put ourselves in line with it. We simply succumb to it, if you will. And so it seems to be the same way now. Prior to that, we want to be clothed properly to resist the arrows of the devil, or to stand up to this temptation. And so in Ephesians chapter 6 here, or 5 here, I think he's, or 6, I think he's showing us what a faithful individual is going to look like. He's going to be clothed with these elements that are going to help him as he walks through life. Here again, supplied by God, right? I mean, all we have to do is pick up the armor and put it on. And so that's, you know, that's encouraging to me. First of all, I don't have to worry about getting the right armor. I use his. It's comprehensive. It takes care of me. He's not going to leave me unprotected in any way, any facet, if we think about these things. The thoughts about that, Ephesians 6, 10 through 13. So in shunning and resisting, part of that is allowing ourselves to be clothed or putting on that which is going to take care of us. Anybody before we move on? Yes, Marcia.
I like verse 13. It's like, it says that you may be able to withstand an evil day, and having done all to stand. It's like he almost just only asks us to stand.
Yeah.
That's where we're going to end, is just being stood.
Yeah. What do you think the evil day is?
Well, whenever any temptation comes up.
Yeah. I think the evil day. Anybody else have any thoughts about that? When the evil day comes, you know, it sounds like this menacing thing, or this approaching storm cloud, and I think it really is any day that something happens. But to me, it's almost this dispensation, or this time that I'm here struggling. That's the evil day, you know. There's probably several ways of interpreting that, but when we're struggling, that could suffice. Yes, right.
Well, you know, also looking at verse 13, how it starts off, it says therefore,
Mm-hmm.
which means you got to look at what happened before.
Right.
And if you look at what's happening before, it says, you know, why you're putting on to be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. And, you know, even backing up to where it's not flesh and blood, but it's spiritual. It's like these same tools that we need to use to gain faith, or to have faith, are the same tools that we have for defense.
Yeah, and they're spiritual in nature. Mm-hmm. They're things that we can't come up with, and we would be foolish to develop our own, or to try and take on an armor that we had produced ourselves, when God gives us exactly what we need.
And if you look at David, when David first was given armor by the king,
mm-hmm.
he was given his armor,
right?
And his armor didn't fit.
No.
He needed God's armor,
mm-hmm.
which were some little pebbles.
Which looked very different than the king's armor, right? Yeah. Man's impression as David walks out there is, this is disaster. And yet, he could not have been more prepared, if you think about it. David, given almost his innocence, his complete and utter trust in God at that moment with just that sling and those smooth rocks. Yes.
You know, I think of challenges we face. I look at Moses when God told Moses what he had to do. The last thing he wanted to do was accept it. I'm not good enough. I'm not strong enough. I'm not capable. I'm not able.
Right.
But with God's help, like Philippians 4:13 says, in fact, using the Lord's table today, we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us.
Yeah, and God even fostered Moses along, if you think about it, and given him Aaron, right? And allowing him someone to stand by his side too. So even though Moses was up to the task, God helped provide him as he went forward as well. Excellent thoughts. Anybody else? We also need to hate and flee from sin, from temptation. A few weeks ago we read Proverbs 6:16 through 19. It said, 7 things the Lord hates, or 6 things the Lord hates, even 7 are an abomination to him. And so we see God hating. Turn to Psalms 119. Psalms 119, verse 104. Psalms 119, 104. Your precepts I get from your precepts I get understanding. Therefore I hate every false way. The psalmist here, here's something that we've talked about over the last couple weeks as well. From your precepts I get understanding. Precepts is translated as mandate. We would think of the law, things that God said to follow or to do. And so as we do these things, there's other scriptures that says practice these things, we get understanding of him. So in verse 104, from your precepts I get understanding, therefore I hate every false way. How do we know they're false? How do we know they're wrong? It's because we're understanding or we're studying or practicing God's precepts, his mandates. And so it naturally draws us closer to him and further away from those things that are false or incorrect. Let's look at verse 130. Psalms 119, 130. The unfolding of your words gives light. It gives understanding to the simple. Verse 131, I opened my mouth wide and panted, for I longed for your commandments. Let us be simple. The unfolding of your words gives light. It gives understanding to the simple. Well, that's who we are. And it's only because of God's word that we have anything or that we know anything. And so when we practice those things or we take those things in, verse 131, I long for your commandments. I opened my mouth wide and panted, for I longed for your commandments. You get this vision of this, of the desire, a need. We all know what panting looks like. You've seen that dog in the summertime or an animal that's extremely hot. That's our desire. That's our yearning for this thing. And what are we yearning for? We're yearning for his commandments. We don't often think about that. We often think of it as his word, I suppose, but it's when we practice the things that he's asked us to do that we really gain understanding. Sometimes we're asked to do things and we might say, why? Or that comes to our, it just doesn't fit. Why would I have to do that, we might say. And then yet, when we do, if we are cautious to occasionally go back and take an accounting, which I think is pretty wise, we go through something, we're faced with a challenge, and we go to God with it, and we see the way in which he would want us to react via his word. We do that, not understanding why, but then hopefully we just don't come out the other end victorious, but to go back and see and look and recognize that God helped us, that we have. And I think so many times we don't do that. We don't take a very proper accounting of how much God has taken care of us. And then as we get to the next bad day, evil day, we are less prepared than we maybe could be. And I think if we would keep, I'm not saying keep a ledger, but just acknowledge how often God maybe scoops us up and carries us along. And it will make it much easier to long for His commandments, to desire to do it the way He wants it done. Any thoughts about those passages? Yeah, Mark.
Yeah, verse 105 says, it's a light to my path.
Right.
And why do we use a light at night? Why do you use a flashlight or street lights? It's because you need help, you need direction, and it just brings everything into focus and gives you confidence going forward.
Yep, absolutely. Anybody else? Marcia?
As I get older, I forget where I put stuff more and more, but praying works.
Right?
You know, you can't find it here, and you pray, and there it is, right there.
Yeah.
My mom told me about that too, and now I know.
Sure. I'm a weird individual, I know. I listened to a TED Talk this last week that talks about how as we age, we need to associate things with places, and some of these memory ideas that you do, and it's really, at first I thought he was nuts, but the more I think about it, keeping track of my phone and think I leave all the keys in my vehicles. I'm waiting for somebody to take them. That's my goal. But some of you people with fancy vehicles, you probably lose your keys all the time. I misplace my phone. That's dangerous when I'm working, because next thing you know, it's a bad day. And so I'm working on this too. And that's a great thought. Anybody else? 2 Timothy chapter 2. Thinking about shunning and resisting temptation. 2 Timothy 2. Second Timothy 2 and verse 22 says, "Now flee from youthful lust and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace with those who call on the Lord from a pure heart." Remember, Paul here talking to the young evangelist is really probably not very young anymore. He's probably in his late 30s, early 40s, something like that, many believe. He says, now flee from youthful lust and pursue righteousness. And so here a direct admonition to flee youthful lust. And this, of course, being told to a young evangelist. So pretty powerful words. I don't know that youthful lust are simply, I did a little bit of reading on that. If you're falling victim to this lust, I guess it really doesn't matter what age you are. But Paul characterizes them as youthful lust, maybe because not so much the age of the individual that's struggling with that, but the age of the Christian walk in which an individual is in, maybe the immature nature that we sometimes exhibit as we struggle against sin and temptation. Maybe that's one way to consider that as youthful. We are simply not very aged yet. So here's Timothy telling Paul to flee youthful lust. Let's look at 1 Timothy 6, verse 11. 1 Timothy 6, verse 11. "But flee from these things, you man of God, and pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, perseverance, and gentleness." And so, so often is a time when you are going to get rid of something, you need to replace it with something else. You need to, if something has occupied your time and you're going to leave that, now you got to find something to occupy that time with. And I think verse 11 is really good because it gives us things to pursue. Pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, perseverance, and gentleness. And so there is more than enough there to fill the hole left by the things that we need to flee from. Fleeing would be, in the Greek here, equivalent to escaping, to shun, and literally to vanish. And so the Greek word here, that's what that is based in, is literally to vanish. So that puts us in a much safer place. Any thoughts on 1 Timothy 6:11? With all of these, Romans 6 is really a key text to what we've been discussing here. So Romans 6, verses 12 through 14. Therefore do not let sin reign in your mortal body, so you obey its lust. And do not go on presenting the members of your body to sin as instruments of unrighteousness, but present yourselves to God as those alive from the dead, and your members as instruments of righteousness to God. For sin shall not be master over you, for you are not under the law, but under grace. That's Romans 6, 12 through 14. What's interesting here is his use of the body, or the members of the body. In the first read, you might think, well, is he talking about, since he's talking to a congregation here, a group, or members of the Lord's body, is he talking about individual members? And yet, if you go back and you look at so many of the references prior to this, as we come down through the verse, when body is talked about, it seems to be the physical body. It seems to be the various parts of the body. But so in verse 12, therefore do not let sin reign in your mortal body, so that you obey its lust. Do not go on presenting the members of your body to sin as instruments of unrighteousness, but present yourselves to God as those alive from the dead, and your members as instruments of righteousness to God. What are the members of your body that could be used as instruments of unrighteousness? Well, kill.
Your brain.
Okay, hang on to that thought. First, very basically, though, the members of our bodies, one of the first things I think of are my hands. The hands represent what with my body? What I'm doing, right? What's another part of my body that would be an instrument? My eyes. It's what I'm seeing. What do my feet represent? Where I go. How about my tongue? The most dangerous part of the body, right? And yet they're all controlled by what? By the heart or the mind, right? And thereby our attitude and things like this. And so I think when Paul, when we're thinking here about what's being said, do not go on presenting the members of your body to sin as instruments of unrighteousness, but present yourselves to God as those alive from the dead. How are they alive from the dead? Yeah.
Born again.
You're right. Yeah, they've come in contact with Christ's blood through the waters of baptism. Your members as instruments of righteousness to God. And so, much akin to the passage, if your hand's going to keep you from heaven, right? Better to enter it with one less hand, right? Cut it off from you. We know that's an analogy. Not a one of us should have a hand left. Honestly, right? And so what's being said there? Well, very much in this same situation. He's making us think about the members of our body, the things that we see, the things that we do, the places we go, the things that we say. All of these things are connected. And so use these things as instruments of righteousness. It's just another way to think about our service to God and our disservice to God. When we are not living properly, it's quite the frightening thought to think that God sees us as using ourselves. This thought of instruments is one of arms or of weapons in the Greek. It means utensils or even tools. And so that's what these body parts are being related to. Weapons or armaments, utensils or tools. And so we're out there working against or accomplishing evil as though our limbs were actual instruments of war. And so what a terrible thing to have God see of us if we're doing that. But this is all, of course, harkens back to the mind or to the heart. and are overcoming temptation. Any thoughts? Yes, Dave?
Yeah, you said the mind, and I think I know that's where I struggle. It's extremely tough to really keep control of the mind, because every one of these functions start with the mind.
Right.
And if we can learn to control our mind, or when our mind gets headed in the wrong direction, we can correct it.
Yep.
Then we can keep these members of our body from
Right.
from doing these things that are not correct. But
Yeah.
that mind concept, like James says, it all starts up here
Right.
in the mind.
And we're going to continue down that path with the next few passages here as well. Anybody else? Yeah.
There's a children's song about be careful little eyes
Right.
what you see.
Yeah.
And that,
That's right.
Can
Be
we
careful,
learn
little
this?
feet, where you go. Be careful, little hands, what you do. Exactly. 1 Corinthians chapter 10. And I think we'll see a pattern here as we continue to look at passages. 1 Corinthians 10, verse 13. No temptation is overtaking you, but such is common to man, and God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will provide a way of escape also, so that you will be able to endure it. 1 Corinthians 10:13 is a very recognizable verse to us. And thinking about shunning and resisting evil, verse 13 I think is a great stalwart passage for us to consider, that God will not allow us to be tempted. God does not tempt. God does not allow us to be tempted beyond a point at which we can withstand. But with it always provide a way of escape. I think misuse of this verse would go into the things, the course of natural living, the things of what are going to befall every individual. For example, bad things that happen, whether they be a car wreck, a death by somebody close in the family, a bad diagnosis, all these things that befall everybody. Now, within those things, there can be found temptation at times, right? If I lose a loved one to a car wreck, I may turn to God and shake my fist and say, "Why me?" And that would be very incorrect. That would maybe be Satan taking an opportunity for me to strike back at what I'm thinking, striking back at God. But those things, that would be errant. That would be incorrect. But God, we are living in a whirlwind, and things are going to affect us, right? If the drunk driver kills one of mine, it's not temptation per se onto me. Now, it may cause me temptation in some way, given the things that might proceed after that. But what we're talking about here is no temptation, says, has overtaken you, but such is common to man. Now, I know this is an old book, written a long time ago, and we seem to invent new ways to sin, right? With our technology and our great education, and I think we think we're greatly educated. It amazes me every time we come around. What is it? Every 4 years we have a leap year, and the Romans figured out all that time back that, hey, we got to change the calendar, otherwise things are getting way out of whack here. How'd they do that? And we can't hardly make coffee in the morning, but we're educated. We think something of ourselves. I don't know. But it says, no temptation has come to you that is not common to man. And so we're not outpacing God's ability to save us. We're not outrunning Christ's blood. And God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with temptation will provide the way of escape also, so that you will be able to endure it. What's the struggle when we're in the middle of temptation? What is often the thing that we can't find? The way of escape, right? Or is it that we're unwilling to find it? Or is it that we really just don't look for it very closely? And then we think back to those attitudes that we talked about, those incorrect attitudes. Well, that's just my struggle, right? And we explain that away. Or this is my sickness. This God, you're gonna just have to take me for what I am. Now I gotta carry this one along with me. And so oftentimes we are unwilling to look for or unwilling to find the way of escape, but God does provide it. He will provide it. But with temptation will provide the way of escape. Isn't it interesting? God will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able. My impression of that is God holding the chain that Satan is attached to. And he's got that big dog by that chain. He only lets him so close to me. But as he has influence to tempt me, God is right there with an alternative. And it's only up to us to take it or not. Thoughts about Corinthians 10:13?
I think verse 12 is important too, because we think that we have to escape, but what if we don't see it? But maybe a friend could help us, but so many times we don't want to ask for help. And then that really gets worse and worse.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, verse 12 seems to speak of attitude, doesn't it? To the one that thinks that he's got it or he's arrived. That's the first thing I think of there. Therefore, let him who thinks he stands take heed that he does not fall. Now, maybe he is standing, but he's being cautioned here with the proper attitude not to fall, not to fall victim to maybe his own righteousness or that sense of accomplishment that he thinks he has arrived. Good thought. Anybody else? Okay. Go ahead.
I'd say that the first passages we read earlier, Ephesians chapter 6, he did give us the tools to escape.
Mm-hmm.
We have all the tools we need to escape,
Mm-hmm.
and we just need to take hold of them.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you know, the Bible tells us that God tempts no man.
Right.
And so the saying was brought up a number of years ago when they're tempted, the devil made me do it.
Right.
And
Mm-hmm.
so that can be an excuse, you know, I got no power over the devil, he made me do it.
Right. Right.
And they excuse themselves in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, and I think what verse 13 says though is that, or helps us to understand with other passages, is that Satan tempts us, but as Satan does that, God is there with the remedy. He is there with the way of escape, and it's simply up to us. And I think too many times we don't want to find it, or we're not looking very hard because we give in or do not resist or shun to the point that we should. Matthew chapter 15. Staying with that theme we talked about here a few moments ago. Matthew 15 is a little longer passage. We probably won't get past this morning, but here again, a passage you're very familiar with. Matthew chapter 15, starting in verse 10. I'll read through quickly. After Jesus called the crowd to him, he said to them, "Hear and understand, is not what enters into the mouth that defiles man, but what proceeds out of the mouth, this defiles the man." Then the disciples came to him and said, "Do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard this statement?" But he answered and said, "Every plant which my heavenly Father did not plant shall be uprooted. Let them alone. They are blind guides of the blind, and if a blind man guides a blind man, both will fall into the pit." Verse 15, Peter said to him, "Explain the parable to us." Jesus said, "Are you still lacking in understanding? Do you not understand that everything that goes into the mouth passes through the stomach and is eliminated, but the things that proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and those defile the man? For out of the heart came evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornication, thefts, false witness, slanders. These are things which defile the man, but to eat with unwashed hands does not defile the man." Now, I know there's a whole lot going on here. And this was the Pharisees coming to Jesus and saying, "Hey, why do you not respect the traditions of the elders of the washing of the hands?" And Jesus had no time for that, right? That was man-made things that they were imposing upon others, and they looked down their nose at his disciples and they said, "They're not doing that. They're not being respectful. They're not following in our traditions. Why aren't they doing that?" And so Jesus confronts them about this and gives them this little tidbit. It's not what enters into the mouth that defiles man, but what proceeds out of the mouth, this defiles a man. And the apostles, Peter, bless his heart, he's our spokesman, right? He's the one that's going to go ask Jesus the dumb question, just like you and I want to. And he's going to stick his foot right in his mouth, and Jesus hammers him for it. He says, are you still lacking in understanding? Yeah. He is. The other 11 are, and we are too. Right? And so we need clarification. And Jesus says, hey, it's not what... there's a process. And it's not what goes into the mouth. This is just how the body functions. But what comes out of the mouth, that originates in here. So just like those body parts, where my hands are doing, my feet are going, my tongue is saying, my eyes are seeing, but they're doing what's coming from in here, right? Or what's referred to as here all the time in Scripture, from the heart. That's where the wrong is. And so, I love this passage. There is so much going on here. But we need to have pure hearts. We need to rid ourselves of these things that trip us up. We're being overrun by young people.
Mm-hmm.
Any last thoughts? Okay, we'll pick up there just a little bit next week and then continue on. Thank you for your attention.